Meet Chad. After recently getting dumped by his uncle, he decided to set out on his own journey. Requiring only 100 push-ups and a 10-kilometer run, he locked his account to only untradable gear, all in the hopes of discovering something new. Welcome to Life of Chad. Last video we solved range, obtaining a basic mid-tier range setup. This time we're focusing on melee. Currently we're rocking the rapier, which is a rune sword equivalent. A rune sword does the job, however real soon we're going to notice it just won't cut it. Get it? Cut. Sword. Never mind. So we are going to focus on an upgrade. But what upgrades are there to be found? And that's exactly where things get interesting. Since my break, Jagex has released a variety of weapons of which are untradable that would benefit the account immensely. One is the Karis Partisan, which is a weapon obtained from completing Beneath Earth Cursed Sands. Its stats are equivalent between that of a dragon and rune sword, so not exactly the best, but it is better, and it is technically the best in slot for Cal fights, having a special effect. Next we have the ARKAN Blade, which is a weapon gained from completing the final Dawn quest. Its stats are on par with the Dragon's Scimitar, and it has a special attack that is pretty useful. This weapon is actually in the recommended gear list for some bosses, although it's typically somewhat low on the list, but it could be good for bossing. And lastly, we have the Colossal Blade, a weapon obtained from the Giant's Foundry for 5,000 points. This weapon's stats are similar to the Barrel Chest Anchor, of which we already have. However, it is for a different attack style, which we'll want to note for later. The weapon also has a passive effect doing more damage to large monsters. However, its downside is it's a two-handed weapon, which means it has a 6-tick attack speed compared to 4, like most two-handed weapons. Now before we dive into what we are going for, let's check out what all grinds we've been doing. The first thing we did on our journey was we completed the Children of the Sun quest, getting us access to Valamor. Upon getting access to Valamor, we go to everyone's favorite AFK spot, the Gemstone Crab, and we ended up grinding 75 attack and strength. Afterwards we headed to the Motherlode Mine to get us a few levels, and as such we got us 34 nuggets, which allows us to buy a piece of the Prospector Kit. The Prospector Kit is an experience boosting set purchasable from Prospector Percy's Nugget Shop or from Petrified Pete's ore shop near the Volcanic Mine. This full set when worn grants plus 2.5% bonus mining experience, and since we just have the boots, we get a plus 0.2% mining experience boost. And that's pretty much it, other than you're rocking some new boots, I guess. Afterwards we head back to the Gemstone Grab and got 71 defense before we finally figured out our goal. As discussed previously, we have 3 weapons to decide from. Now the main one, which is the most versatile, being the ARKAN Blade as discussed. However, it has a few requirements. 4 quests specifically: Twilight's Promise, the Heart of Darkness, Perilous Moons, and lastly the Final Dawn. With these requires some skill requirements, which is 48 Thieving and 48 Slayer, as well as 20 Hunter and 66 Thieving, 52 Runecrafting, and 52 Fletching. All of those are which I don't have the skill level for. However, there is a further issue with this quest line that we need to go into. With each of these quests, they have specific bosses that you need to complete. And although we could probably handle the Final Dawn quest, our main issue is actually the Perilous Moons. Now for those of you that don't know about the Perilous Moons, this quest has 3 different main bosses which allow you to kill them outside the quest as well. Now these bosses are weak to specific styles. The styles being the Blue Moon is weak to Crush, the Eclipse Moon is weak to Stab, and the Blood Moon is weak to Slash. And although we have the Barrel Chest Anchor, that technically only works for one, the Blue Moon, and that one's considered the easiest boss. So that leads us with a dilemma. If we want the ARKAN Blade, we need a solution to the other 2 bosses. Currently, we have a Rapier, which you'd think could maybe work if we were good. However, there are a few issues. 1, overheads don't work on this boss, so we have to tank. 2, this boss possesses flat armor, which reduces all hit splats dealt by the flat armor value. So low values are even lower. 3, our gear is void, which doesn't have a high defense stat value, and according to the wiki, while it is possible to kill all 3 moons with approximately 60 defense with rune armor if using steel skin, ultimate strength, and incredible reflexes, this is not particularly practical for repeat completion, and blood moon in particular may be especially challenging. For those of you that don't know, full void has half the defensive value as full rune, or roughly. So yeah, I don't even think that's even close to being possible. And lastly, the kick on top, which was stated in the wiki description, is the blood moon can heal itself. So we need an upgrade. First, we ended up doing some Slayer to end up getting that level up to hit that skill requirement for the final dawn. And in doing so, we ended up getting 63 magic. And then we also went to Konar with some 3 keys that we got from doing fire giants. And let's go in and see what we got next. And we have Calfights, not Calfights. And look at that. Let's go in and loot up our chest a bit, see what we get. We got diamonds, we got rubies, and let me guess, sapphires? No, we got gold ore. Perfect for making amulets. If only the amulets were untradable. Just maybe. Now afterwards, we ended up doing some hunter training. We ended up catching these copper wagtails. Now, fun fact, in here, whenever you're level 12, the ideal way to get XP is to catch butterflies. The issue with an untradable gear locked account, in order to catch butterflies, you need a butterfly net, of which you can't equip one. So we ended up just catching these all the way up to level 20, and that was that. Now, for the butterfly net, there is an untradable one called, I think it's the magic net or whatever. It's the one you get from Puro. However, the skill requirements in order for us to even obtain it is higher because we're going to then have to barehandedly catch implings. We then completed Enter the Abyss and ended up getting 9 rune crafting from that before heading to the air altar and making air runes for level 10 rune crafting. Let's go. We then took a break and did puzzle match in the Abyss. It was pretty fun. I love colors. Just kidding, we ended up doing the Temple of the Eye quest, and I'm going to say this quest cinematics and a lot of the newer ones that I've done so far recently have been like pretty high quality compared to like some of the ones I'm used to. So I actually do like applaud Jagex for doing this. So we ended up getting Temple of the Eye, which granted us 26 rune crafting, which hits that target level, which was 20, I believe. And then we got 48 Slayer, just killing our final task of Calfights. Now, along with the Calfight slaying, we ended up completing the task, which gave us 20 tasks and bringing us to 137 Slayer X or points. One step closer to that Slayer health. And then finally on our skill grind, which was so much, we ended up finishing it off with thieving. We were originally at 54 thieving, and we ended up just grinding out some wealthy citizens since we unlocked Valamore, and we ended up grinding all the way up to 66 thieving, which took several hours. The only good thing about this is once you get the keys, you can pretty much AFK in these chests, which did make them like so much better, and the XP is actually pretty decent here, so I can't complain. But 66 thieving, let's go. Now all the GP from the wealthy citizens, we ended up using that to recover our rune costs from doing those Slayer for a few levels as we safe spotted everything, as like currently we're not really that set up for doing Slayer, which is why we're doing the upgrades. Now let's go to the theory crafting board and discuss the Colossal Blade. Let's now go in depth for this amazing weapon. The Colossal Blade's stats are similar to the Barrel Chest Anchor, however focusing on slash instead of crush. Plus 98 in slash, but it has a -4 in stab. It also has plus 100 in strength. Its passive effect grants it a higher max hit depending on how large the monster is, to a max of plus 10, being a 5x5 monster. Now this weapon was released in 2022, of which there were some people stating this could be busted one day. Unfortunately, I don't believe this weapon will ever be busted in a sense, as there is a plus 10 cap on the max hit. However, this doesn't mean this weapon doesn't have potential. For bossing, it's already been discovered that this has some use, as most bosses are large, which means it gets its bonus. But for standard creatures, most weapons lose due to not getting the buff, as they are just too small, kind of like me. And that solely comes down to the gemstone crab. The gemstone crab was released in 2025 and is a 5x5 monster with very low defensive stats, and since it's large, it gets the plus 10 bonus, thus making this sword deal massive damage. So much damage, in fact, it pretty much out DPS's all other non-tier 80 weapons at the gemstone crab specifically, hitting a whopping 5.325 DPS when using slash. With their current gear setup at least. Now, your results may vary as different gear will benefit different weapons better. We're using Void with a bone beads of the dead, so obviously if you have a lot better gear, other weapons could be better, but for full Void, this out DPS's every other non-tier 80 weapon that I've tested on, and I don't have a reason to not believe that. I'm leaving this caveat here, as I know there's going to be some keyboard warriors stating that this is completely wrong. They're going to say, tested with a Dragon Scimitar, Gemstone Crab for 1 hour, and it did better than your Colossal Blade did. Again, this evidence is anecdotal. With all DPS, this is an average result based on formulas. Given the standard deviation, it can be higher or lower. Jagex has provided this, therefore it is possible to get more XP or less XP per hour using one weapon over the other, depending on RNG of course. This is the reason why some people get pets and like 12 kills. I'm also not stating for every account to get this. However, I believe that all Ironmen that prefer AFKing, that this is a wise investment, as it only takes around 6 to 7 hours, or you'll need the smithing XP anyways. Of course, the choice is up to you. I'm not a RuneScape advisor, I'm just a Chad. Now let's get into the grind for obtaining the Colossal Blade. Now first thing, when I was going for the Colossal Blade, I read that you needed iron or steel items that you can put into the cauldron. So I decided to buy some from the Varrock store, but I bought the daggers and the swords. It turns out you cannot use daggers, so I do not recommend buying daggers. I'll show you what I actually got instead though. Now with the Fortis Blacksmith, they actually have a plate body shop or armor shop here that sells plenty of different plate bodies, and this is what I've decided to do to get my gear for doing the Giant's Foundry. So what we do is we end up buying the plate bodies from the blacksmith, and then we hop worlds. Ideally you're going to want iron, steel, or mithril. Iron and steel are going to be a lot cheaper than mithril, however you do make most of your money back. Mithril and steel, however, will give you more XP per hour and more points. So you can leave that up to whatever, and how long you want to stay here, and how much GP you want to spend. Now prior to having access to the minigame, you actually have to do the Sleeping Giants quest. And like I said, the cinematics are just peak. They're just really nice to watch and just see, like, the amount of effort, like especially in the HD, like you just see everything, and Giant's Foundry just looks really nice. And there we go, we have completed the Sleeping Giants quest, getting us access to the Giant's Foundry minigame. There's 55 smithing, 58 smithing, 63 smithing, and now that I've done a handful of Giant's Foundry, let's actually discuss a few things. So I ended up doing, you don't need ice gloves. So there's some guys out there that say you need ice gloves. There is no point in ice gloves, all you need is water, and since you just throw plate bodies in there most of the time, you can have like 5 to 10 water buckets and just fill them up right next door, throw them on one at a time for everyone. Don't need them. 2, in order to obtain the blade, you need 5,000 points. If you use mithril steel, you can obtain that in around 50 swords. Now each sword will take about 5 minutes apiece, so you are looking at least 5 hours worth, if I'm not mistaken on my calculations. Probably like 5 to 7 hours worth. Do note that this minigame is severely cling intensive. If you look away for too long, you're going to lower your points gained, because this is gained by how focused you are. This minigame grants you a lot of smithing experience, and I'm going to say for Ironman, this is probably one of the best smithing ways out there, as otherwise you have to gather the ore and make everything. This, you can just buy the gear straight from a shop, throw it in here and go ham, with the downside being it is severely cling intensive, of course. I do like this minigame, and I've found that, so if you mix iron with steel, you have the 4 bars, which does make this slightly more AFK. If you use steel and mithril, you have 5 bars, which make this more click intensive, but you get more points per sword. So it is up to you what you want to do. Personally, I did a mixture of both because one's cheaper and one gave me more points, therefore less grinding or less swords to make, therefore just more things. This is click intensive, so I couldn't really do this in the background, so this did take me longer to do than what would be typical. But overall, I'll say this minigame is pretty nice and a good, just relaxing thing to do if you just want to do it. I wouldn't actually say relaxing, but just a fun thing to do on occasions. But could I grind this for like 20 or 30 hours? No. 5 hours is good enough, and I ain't gonna come back here until I actually need the skill requirement again. But that's everything about this minigame. Let's get into the next part. 67 smithing. And finally, after all that grinding, we're finally able to go to the shop. With 5,013 points, we end up buying the Colossal Blade. Now something what's really cool about the Colossal Blade is it has its own walk animation. Now comparing this to the one in the Giant's Foundry minigame, that one looks more like the barrel chest anchor, and this one is clearly unique, and he's like dragging the sword across, which I actually find that pretty cool. However, there's some people that prefer the Giant's Foundry one, but I like that they actually have different ones for the weapon instead of reusing the carrying style throughout. And of course, as soon as we obtained it, we went straight to the gemstone crab just to flex our weapon. Oh yeah, there we go. And with the gemstone crab, you can see our XP drops are about 100 per swing. That's just because we're just hitting so high. And in case anyone doesn't know, make sure to bring strength pots, as that boosts your XP per hour immensely. And just say, and I actually was able to out DPS a lot of other people, getting top 16, getting us able to mine the gemstone crab. If only I brought a pickaxe. Now that we have the Colossal Blade, let's talk about the moons. The barrel chest anchor is a crush weapon, thus it will be our choice versus the blue moon. I solely believe that we can defeat this without too much hassle, as it is the easiest moon and our armor is subpar, but I think it's doable. The Colossal Blade is a slash blade, thus it will be our weapon of choice versus the blood moon. The blood moon will be our most difficult moon as it can heal, but I believe we can hopefully do the skip. We will probably fail, however, luckily, there is unlimited food that we can obtain, so we're not wasting resources. The Eclipse Moon, the Colossal Blade is actually recommended for its clone phase, which is great. However, the Colossal Blade doesn't have a recommended stab attack style. The barrel chest anchor does, however, DPS calculations show that the Colossal Blade is actually better, having a DPS of about 2. That's not a high DPS, but comparing it to other stab weapons, I found that this is on par with some others, which is strange, but I've never actually done the moons before, so it'll be an experience. Thus, overall, we're going to have to see in next video on if we can make this all work. And hopefully we can. Otherwise, I don't know what our goal of the video will be. Now thank you all for tuning in, and goodbye.